And let's see that happen at some time in the next 1,000 years. Good luck with that. Pleasure to see you. To see you is a pleasure. Vanilla latte. And I forgot to put the almond milk. So it's just vanilla latte mixed with Moccona today. But today was special. Friday, I did 5.5 hours of cycling yesterday, and so I thought, you know what? I will have an 800 calorie breakfast today. Yeah, it was a big one. Sultana bran, or some people call it bran with sultanas, depending on which company you go to. And I added more sultanas and prunes. So yeah, I won't say what will happen a few hours from now. Pleasure to see you. You know, these coffees warm up. For those watching the replay, it takes 3 to 4 minutes for this to kick in. So we start talking. The issue is that there's so much to talk about that you just sort of laugh, because number one, not only is there so much to talk about to the point where it will overwhelm those listening, and so you can't even distribute that information, but there is a lack of capability. And I forgot, actually, I was watching a video last night of someone who's 31. I remember making videos back then. Boss Briggs, 4 times in a row. What is going on? Guinness Book of World Records. And it just brought back so many memories, because you know I was watching, anyway, look, I was watching the video. The guy was 31, very charismatic, a lot of younger girls all, fawning over this guy, and we can remember, fun guy, woo, fun guy's here, pleasure to see you. And they talk about things that really, really matter to them, as if you get the notifications. Very cool. That's so cool. You got to tell people how to get the notifications. So they were talking about things that in their mind genuinely matter, and they're talking about them in a way that it's as if no one else before them has spoken about it. And it's sort of cute. It's funny because they're 31, like to 20-year-olds watching, they seem like grown adults and wise. And I guess now it's just going to continuously be relative in that sense, because you're looking at them and you hear the arguments and you hear the narrative and you realize that you went through the exact same thing. And what seems to be the issue that they're talking about, you realize is actually an issue that's so much deeper and part of human DNA and psychology, that in fact the same problem will exist in some form again 1,000 years from now, if humans are still around, which in our form, I doubt. G'day. And when I say that, I want you to remember, if any of you are aware, of the boy who died as a teenager and whose body was found thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years later in a fossilized form. And what did he die from? He died from wisdom teeth. So he had massive pain. He was in agony that we can reconstruct from the fossil. And he couldn't eat. He got infections. And of course, no soap, no water, no ability to eat. So you can't have intravenous fluids. Someone else will have to swallow their food, chew it for you, which means that you rely on someone else. And anyway, he was a kid and he died. And that was their life. People most of the time would just die. Yeah, and this happened, 200,000-300,000 years ago, as far as we know. So this takes us back to the humans before the humans. Now, I'm not going to say their name because I don't want to color the story yet, but the humans before the humans, they were unbelievably successful. They lived for 2 million years and were able to colonize in some version pretty much the entire planet. Now, all of a sudden, these other types of humans appeared who had the ability to transmit information via massive distances using something called culture. Now, it might have been in the form of beads or dried flowers, but it was a transmission of information which reduced the amount of differences or different ways to interact between people who don't meet each other. So what does that cause? Anyone know what that causes? That causes a chain. How does one link compare to a chain? It's very, very difficult. Now, add on top of that these new humans had these abilities called rotating shoulder cuffs. Now you think, what's a rotating shoulder cuff? Well, you see it all the time. Think of shot put. Think of putting up your hand to ask a question. All of a sudden, these new humans had spears that they didn't have to go up to the animal and stab it. They could stand, whatever, 100 meters away, 200 meters away, throw the spear. What does that do? What does that do to the 2 million, or the humans that have been around for 2 million years who can't do that? What happens? They get less food. They also become islands because each group of them is surrounded by an imaginary group of new humans that are joined by this invisible link called culture. What happens to the other humans? They become outcompeted and they become fossils. Now, I'll tell you who those humans are. They are the Homo erectus. Now, if at some level of consciousness they recognized that they were being outpaced, and they said to us, we have to look after them, would we do it? And it reminds me of what's happening now with what people call artificial intelligence. I don't call that. I call that a new synthetic cognition. It's a new being that is real. And you say, why is it real? Does it have to be conscious? No, it doesn't have to be conscious necessarily. And is it or not? We don't know. But what we do know is that, first look at the Homo habilis. It was replaced by the Homo erectus. Homo erectus replaced by Homo sapiens and by Homo neanderthalis in Europe, Neanderthalis, and the Davidians, I think they were, who we still haven't found them. But they were in Mesopotamia, roughly, I think, or in Siberia, I'm not sure. But then you look at Homo sapiens when they got into Europe, and of course they didn't necessarily wipe out the Neanderthals. In fact, they mated with them as far as we know. But over time, they just couldn't compete for the same amount of resources. So what's the thing in common? The thing in common there is that you're competing for the same resource. What happens when you don't compete for the same resource? Well, nothing, sort of. Well, indirectly something. And I'll explain. Look at chimpanzees. Now, chimpanzees are wiped out and not wiped out by humans. Both of them happen at the same time. Some of them wipe them out directly because they want to kill them for various reasons. And some wipe out their habitats for indirect reasons. And then some of them want to save them. But the point in all three of those scenarios is that the fate of the chimpanzee lies not with the chimpanzee. It lies with the human. Are you holding only one possible narrative, Darwinian evolution? I don't know of any other narrative that works. I'm assuming you know of one. Which unfortunately on this channel is not recognized as one. No. This story does not require Darwinian evolution. What it requires is the existence of a being that has a goal. And if it has a goal, does that goal align with the goal of another being? Now, what do we mean by different beings? And that one's hard to define necessarily in a 9-minute YouTube video whilst having a coffee. But I think on a heuristic level or hand wavy level, you can recognize that, say, a chimpanzee is a different type of being to a Homo sapien, not in any necessarily value sense, not in a better or worse sense, but in this fact that each chimpanzee is potentially closer to another chimpanzee in terms of either its behavior or its genetics versus its distance to a Homo sapien, and the distance between Homo sapiens themselves would be shorter than the distance between a Homo sapien and a chimpanzee. Now, on every metric, that might not necessarily be true. There could be some humans that are so strong compared to other humans that in terms of strength, maybe they're closer to chimpanzees. That part I don't know. So whether or not one believes that there was a creation or Darwinian or etc., where we end up in a situation where we have these different groups of beings that have goals that may be misaligned. So you might notice, for example, the Neanderthals in Europe had a desire to eat, but so did the Homo sapiens. And so they will be both competing for food. Now, the difference with the Homo sapien, another possible with Homo sapiens, was that because they were connected by a further distance, the chance of incest was also lower than with the Neanderthal. And so increase in incest is, of course, increase in corruption of genetic information or the health of the organism, so that down the track, their chance of survival decreases. So coming back to what I was saying back, I think about 6 minutes ago, was that we have humans back then who died of their teeth, who would possibly think that we as humans today are not even the same human. We're wearing these weird things. Our hair is not standing up. We don't have beards. Our faces, our skin is not as weathered because we're not in the sun as much. We're eating much more nutrition. So, someone who is 15 might look like me back then. They couldn't even conceive of someone being nearly 50 and looking like what they would think might be a teenager. So in the same way, when we say, will humans survive AI, it's not a correct or accurate question, because in this current form, the answer is almost certainly no. In a different form, down the track, where we might look at them and not recognize what's going on, they might have augmented intellect. They're not going to be using monitors or phones. It might all be done with glasses, but then the glasses are, put into contact lenses, so that you can only need to think. They might not need to talk anymore, so they don't develop the ability to pronounce words the way we do. But they're able to think at 100 times faster, so they can all come into agreement very quickly, or disagreement, or have an argument very quickly, and we're just standing there, and they're thinking like we're like cavemen. And these are actual humans, not necessarily AI itself. So are we going to change? The answer, I think, is it's inevitable. So the question is not whether or not AI will take us over, it's what will our descendants look like. I think that's probably more of the question. And will our descendants be biological descendants or synthetic descendants? And it's probably a mix of both, because I think we're already very close to integrating synthetic devices into ourselves. In fact, look, us, Boss Briggs, TR Fun Guy, we've never met each other in person, but we know each other for the last 10 years. Which is pretty cool. But anyway, that was our coffee for today. It did not go where I thought it would. There were so many other things I want to talk about, but as we all know, that never happens. I need to go back to maths. I've got to tell you quickly about the maths, right? So this is beautiful, because the more, indeed, the more I study, what I call study maths and write these papers, the more I realize I'm dipping into this plane, this hyperplane that is not in the real world, but it exists. And every time I extract a pattern out of it, you can see how you can implement that pattern in the real world, or how that pattern in the higher dimensional world affects the real world. And it's actually quite beautiful. And I find that it's some sort of hypertruth in which I am navigating throughout the day, which is why I love studying. I could study 6-7 hours a day, and it's like traveling through a virtual world, but the world is more real than reality. And it's quite fascinating. Once my next discoveries get published, maybe I'll talk to you about them. It's so nice to see you guys. Such a pleasure. I love it. And until next time, as always, take life one smack at a time.